In this video, I will show you how I converted a set of 1928 to 1931 Model A Ford vintage headlights to halogen lighting. This conversion only cost me slightly over $10. You can use this technique easily and apply it to any other vintage headlight. Now let's get started and I'll show you how. Hi, I'm John from 1929FordHotRod.com.
Hi, it's John from 1929FordHotRod.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a headlight conversion, a halogen headlight conversion for the 1928 to 31 Model A Ford headlights. This is an old one I experimented with. As you can see, the reflector is not much good, but it was just an experiment. I have a pair of headlights taken from an old Ford Explorer, and I'm going to cut along the black lines here to just keep the housing for the headlight bulb. To make this cut, I will use my metal cutting bandsaw. This is the metal cutting bandsaw that I will use to cut the Ford Explorer headlights apart, just to keep only the housing for the headlight bulb. So here I have both pieces cut off. So I'm only going to keep these pieces right here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mount them in the lathe and turn them around. Before I mount these in the lathe, I'm going to rough cut them to the mark that I've drawn on with the magic marker, and it'll just make it a little easier in the lathe. So I'll use the bandsaw again for this. Because this is an odd shape, it's going to be difficult to cut because it's not going to lay totally flat at times on the bandsaw table, so you'll have to be very careful to keep your fingers away from the blade. So here I have it. Now I'm going to mount it in the lathe. So right here I have it mounted in the lathe. Plastic cuts very easily, but small light cuts because this is not a very uniform shape and it will fly out if you're not careful. So here I have it evened out to a nice round diameter. I'll turn the other one and then I will wait and see what final diameter I need. Looks like the final diameter will be 2 3/4 inches. I put a little bevel on this edge here just to get rid of plastic burring. Well, I have both of the headlight mounts for the halogen bulbs turned to a final diameter and they're ready to mount into a reflector. Do not rub on silver coating because it will rub off very easily. Well, what's left of the Ford Explorer headlights we'll just toss into the garbage can. Well, for my headlight pots, I'm not going to use these old reconditioned reflectors. They've been painted silver. Not going to work very well. So instead I found, if you can imagine this, stainless steel bowls at the dollar store for $1 each. And they're the right diameter, right size. It's like they were made for the Model A headlight pot. So now I'm going to drill the holes in for the actual halogen bulbs. I reversed the jaws in the lathe chuck to mount the bowl so I can drill a hole for the bulb mount. I'm just going to make it big enough for this part here where between my two fingers. Well, the hole's bored out now and this piece fits in nicely. Of course it's reverse, so I'll take it out of the lathe. I have the hole bored out now. It was a difficult process in the lathe as the material is very thin and moves around quite a bit. Here's the adapter for my halogen bulb. It'll fit in and there you go. So now we'll just screw that into the new reflector. Before I could mount the halogen bulb mounts into the reflectors that I've made, I had to shape the bottom of the bowls a little wee bit. The bottom of the bowls were flat and there's a slight curvature in the pieces that I cut out from the Ford Explorer headlights. To do that, I just used a small piece of firewood, turned it in the lathe to approximately the shape that I wanted, and pounded away until I got the right curvature at the bottom of the bowl. I then used two 4x40 1/2-inch screws to attach the new mount into the reflector. I also wanted to have the signal lights inside the reflector, so I drilled a hole and mounted in the bulb mount. I'm going to use a single element 1156A bulb, and they are orange or yellowish orange, and they'll be fairly bright and you should be able to see the signal lights nicely in the headlights. Using the air cut-off saw, I cut off this extra piece from the back of the bulbs, exposing the rear terminals of the bulbs. Now I'll be able to solder some wires on and make the bulb look like this. To solder the wires onto the bulb, I use 60/40 solder. I've got a 50-watt soldering iron, a sponge to keep the end of the soldering iron clean, and a little magnetic stand and alligator clips to hold the wire and the bulb in place, so there's no movement while I'm soldering. I noticed that the terminals on the back of the bulbs are made out of stainless steel, and this would pose to be a bit of a problem for soldering. So as a result, I'm going to change my plan and I'm going to use these 0.11 tab type connectors and solder those onto the wires. This will work just as well. All the terminals that I put on my wires I solder. I tend to think it's just a little wee bit better than a crimp connection. I've seen a few crimp connections that have gone resistive and created a high heat condition in cars, resulting in near fires. So this is just what I do. Not everybody will do that. It takes a lot more time. In order to do the solder connection, I again attach the wire in this magnetic holder that I have, and I attach both ends to the alligator clip so there's no movement during the soldering process. I have the wires soldered onto the terminals and attached to the bulbs. What I actually ended up doing was I attached the terminals to the bulbs and then inserted the wires and then did the soldering. I just found it to be a little wee bit easier and faster. Now I'm going to put a little bit of heat shrink over the terminal connections and insulate it. This is what the finished bulb conversion and reflector looks like from the back side, and here it is on the inside. The reflector is now completed. I have a nice little terminal that I'm going to match up with a terminal connector inside the headlight pot. The wires go through the homemade conduit that I made using some 1/2-inch plumbing conduit for a stainless steel conduit. Didn't cost very much. Worked out quite well actually. Now we'll get the headlight all put together and put it onto the Model A. One last thing before you put this all together. The turn signal bulb is picking up its ground through the reflector. The middle terminal on the halogen bulb is ground. Here's my ground lug, and I also have a second wire coming back to the reflector through one of the mounting screws that hold the adapter in place. The conduit is only big enough for 3 16-gauge wires to go through it. Ideally, I would have liked to bring the ground wire through the conduit, but I'm going to pick up ground right here on the mounting bracket for the headlight. So this ground point will serve as a ground for the turn signal and the halogen bulb. Finally, to finish off, I used a tie wrap to tie the electrical connector together. As I used connectors and plugs from the inside of a computer, and I put a couple tie wraps here on the wire so that it can only be pulled so far through the conduit. Again, I used only 16-gauge wire to go through the conduit here. This end here that'll go through the rad shell will connect actually to 14-gauge wire to be a little more electrically sound and safe. I'm at the final stages of the assembly of these headlights. The reflectors are just about ready to go in. What I did do is I notched the sides of the reflectors to facilitate the installation of a small screw on each side of the reflector, similar to the tab that would fold over to the original, but I'm using now a screw. So this keeps the reflector in place. Additionally, I'm using some foam tape, 1/4-inch foam tape around the reflector to help seal and make this weather tight. I'll also glue a little bit of 3/8 by 1/4-inch foam tape on this side, and I should have a perfect weather seal for the headlight pots. Well, I have the headlight all put back together again. Let's test it and see what it all looks like. Signal light, high beam, low beam with signal. High beam with signal. Well, this is another job completed. Well, many would say, why would I go and spend all this time to do this conversion when I can go out and purchase brand new reflectors with the halogen bulb conversion already installed? Well, part of what I'm doing is the challenge of creating, designing, building, but doing it all as cheaply as I can. That's the main focus of 1929FordHotRod.com, to build a car, not only a hot rod, but a nice hot rod. When I say a nice hot rod, I mean a nice hot rod with very little out-of-pocket expense. So far, I'm right on track. What did this cost me? Just around $12. $5 for 2 signal light bulbs, $5 for foam tape to seal the lens to the pot, and $2 for the stainless steel bowls from the dollar store. The halogen bulbs came from a Ford Explorer that I salvaged the parts from, and I had a little bit of wire connectors and various other things already in the shop. So not too bad for a day's work.
Feedback and comments are always welcome. Thanks for watching. Please visit my website at 1929fordhotrod.com.